They have conceded our framework. They have no counter-interpretation, which means the framework for the debate should be that the judge should decide between topical policy options defended by the affirmative and status quo or competitive policy option. There are three separate reasons that co-conceded throughout this debate. It means that you should vote negative even if we win any of them. It's a reason to reject the affirmative first. And it's the informed decision-making. By skewing the predictable ground, the informed destroys our ability to have an informed discussion on their arguments. We can't rigorously test the merits of our approach. Informed discussion is a prerequisite for signing the ballot fair, and rigorous test of both teams' arguments is necessary to truthfully evaluate them. Even if they run a risk of offense, you shouldn't evaluate their arguments because of a deliberate structure in which they engage in is flawed. Second is our emotional hijacking argument. Our framework excludes personal stories and narratives. This prevents emotional disruptions, traumatic memories from being relived. You should adopt a precaution. They've conceded that you should adopt a precautionary principle when evaluating this because it is impossible to know when the line might be pushed too far. Third is the reciprocal literature part. The work of policy advocates and critical spectators can be judged by the same standards of proof. This lowers the burden of proof from the evidence, which makes the debate fundamentally unfair. If you accept their interpretation, you should be able to invite personal stories and narratives. It is functionally impossible for the other team to be able to research or generate arguments against an individual's personal story that generates thousands of pages of research, which is impossible to be able to argue against. This means that when there is no reciprocal literature, we can't engage in the same kind of dialogue which they concede is a prerequisite in order to be able to change a community or change any kind of social norms. Therefore, argument that this debate should be evaluated from the role of deliberating the press. However, they've conceded and they don't take any kind of action, which means your interpretation is fundamentally flawed. If the negative can't contemplate or propose an alternative to engaging in the liberation of the oppressed, you have fundamentally excluded us from this debate, which means that we have no educational benefit. Also, it does not engage in the same type of predictable limits or the dialogue in which you want to be able to change the system if we cannot engage in that type of literature-based or which policy would be best. This is a reason why we have to have an agreed-upon question, which our Shively evidence indicates would have to be necessary in order to have this type of engagement. Our argument is the Supreme Court in the resolution is the prerequisite engagement for this type of discussion. They say the discourse is the same type of discourse of domination. However, there's no warrants to this argument. Our argument is this is the only way we can have reciprocal type of debate as well as have informed decision making on which is the best policy for debate. They say exclusion, however, they've conceded, and exclusion is inevitable. In our Shively evidence that indicates that we have to have an exit policy and said we have to have that agreed upon limits in order to be able to achieve this type of standards. Also, fairness and fair ground should be able to outweigh our ground. In the case for us to debate, every argument made this debate becomes a moot point and should not become evaluated because it was made in the context of an unfair and inequitable ground strategy. Time allocation arguments were made or depended on the existence of something significant to stand this ground. They say rear arguments. However, our first piece of evidence about the Racing Pentagon project isolates several reasons and focusing on Freer's liberation of the oppressed is counterproductive. First is focus only reinforces a banking dynamic that forces progressive ideologies upon students. This ensures that exclusion will occur under their own framework because not everybody will agree with them. This prevents authentic agency, turning their awareness and dialogue argument. Second is our Blackboard evidence indicates that this approach fails and marginalizes. It assumes that the groups of people are powerless. This and predetermined. This evidence cites the example of Latin American indigenous populations and a persons who have other forms of power. This idea is essentialism and forces persons into conformity. And our TAN evidence and our Hendricks evidence are on point, indicating the liberation of the oppressed will fail and erase the type of differences which they assume is necessary. This makes the oppressed dependent upon an external and paternalistic source of knowledge. Further, is inherently essentialized and prevents a multidimensional readings of identity. These arguments all conceded throughout this debate. They say that we force them to use law only. We force them to only use the law. We expect we're Hendricks argument. However, there's no warrant to this argument. Our argument is that you should have the agreed upon question. You can make advocacy why you shouldn't use the law, but that should not be within the context of a debate round for the reasons that I isolated above, as well as informed decision making, as well as reciprocal literature. They say, and Roberts criticized Zizek, we won't go for those types of arguments. It doesn't apply to our framework arguments. They say Carlson evidence assumes a dimensional sphere. However, this doesn't assume our framework arguments. They say role play leads to conflicts and shattered agency. However, our goal is to Galloway and Sullivan evidence indicates that this is the only way we can actually learn about the structure of the system and engage in ways to be able to break it down by learning about the education policy of which the Supreme Court as well as the judicial branch engages in, and the way in which they make those types of decisions. That's the way we can learn to challenge those types of systems. When you only go for personal agency, you ignore the only system when you ignore the one route for people to be able to take. These say that these shouldn't be included. However, that's our Shively evidence that we have to have an agreed upon question. They say there is no reason why consensus racing is bad. However, however, you can read the consensus reason is not bad, however, we argue, and you should do it within the context of a policy framework as well as a framework which has a prerequisite, i.e., you should rule upon the Supreme Court in order to engage in that consciousness raising, because that is a critical prerequisite in order to engage in these type of reciprocal literature and allow us to be able to debate you. They say narratives empower us, however, we're not debating about the narratives, we're debating about framework, which means your type of advocacy shifts away from debating about narratives and the policies that empower you by not having the topical advocacy. They say that what advice should we give people, however, our argument is that by working within the system, we can actually give people better advice, and they say that this education event is best, however, there's no words to this argument, plus they've conceded that we can't have reciprocal literature on personal stories, which means that this is not the type of best of education. They say that it's a story's independent agency, however, that we should have somewhat limited interpretation. You can still use agency within the context of Supreme Court government, Supreme Court action, arguing your own personal stories. They say narratives, they have narratives specific to the topic, however, you don't defend the kind of action, which means you're still unpredictable. They say they're not emotional hijacking, however, our argument is that when you read narratives, that forces us to do a debate about attacking each other rather than focusing on the actual stories, which means shifts your focus to when narratives is good. They say that they're not, also they say that they don't get co-opted, however, our argument is not a co-optation, but you will lose on this type of debate. They've also conceded our narcissism argument, which makes it that they should lose debate. Our argument is that they're all framed into debate just to win a ballot. Is the role of activists that ignores the goals of their project, which means their project will never be able to be successful. This is conceded, and you want to are no new to your arguments. This is an easy way to vote for negative.
How much time, please?
325.
I'm going to start from 3.
That candy torch.